The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty plains as Nathan Ziegler rode into Gunnison, Colorado in the autumn of 1879. His body ached from weeks in the saddle, but it was the hollow feeling in his chest that truly pained him. 3 years of drifting from town to town, taking odd jobs and sleeping under stars that no longer held any wonder, had left him weathered beyond his 30 years. The war had taken his youth, and life since had taken nearly everything else. As he guided his chestnut mare toward the only visible homestead on the outskirts of town, he couldn't have known how a chance encounter would forever alter the course of his life. The small ranch sat nestled against the foothills, a modest but sturdy cabin with a weathered barn nearby. What caught Nathan's eye, however, were the fresh mounds of earth behind the house, 5 of them, each marked with crude wooden crosses. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip. Fresh graves meant recent death, and recent death in these parts often meant trouble. As he approached cautiously, a woman emerged from the cabin, a rifle held steadily in her hands. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical knot, her face smudged with dirt, but even from a distance, Nathan could see the fierce determination in her eyes. "That's far enough, stranger," she called out, her voice steady despite the obvious exhaustion etched across her features. Nathan raised his hands slowly. "Madam, I mean no harm, just passing through and saw your place, thought you might need some help." Her laugh was bitter as she gestured toward the graves with her rifle. "You're a bit late for that. They're all gone now." Something in her tone, a mixture of grief, exhaustion, and resolute strength, touched something in Nathan he thought long dead. "You're not alone," he said simply. She studied him for a long moment, the rifle never wavering. "Name's Nora Nielsen, and I've heard plenty of empty promises from men passing through." "Nathan Ziegler," he replied, "and I don't make promises I can't keep." Their eyes locked across the yard, and in that moment, neither could have predicted how their lives would intertwine in the months to come. The rifle finally lowered slightly. "You can water your horse at the trough, then be on your way." But Nathan's gaze had already shifted to the unfinished fence, the overgrown garden, and the barn door hanging precariously from a broken hinge. "Looks like you could use an extra pair of hands around here." "I don't need charity," Nora said sharply, "not offering charity. Offering work for fair pay." He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "Food and a place to sleep would do." Nora's eyes narrowed as she considered him. The sun was setting quickly now, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. With a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep within, she nodded toward the barn. "You can sleep there tonight. We'll see about tomorrow." As Nathan led his horse toward the water trough, his boots crunched over the hard, packed earth. He couldn't help but glance back at the 5 graves standing in silent witness against the twilight sky. "Typhoid," Nora said, following his gaze. "Took my husband first, then my in-laws, then 2 ranch hands who stayed to help." Her voice was flat, as though she had exhausted all emotion. "Buried the last one 3 days ago." Nathan nodded, understanding now the weariness that hung about her like a shroud. "I'm sorry for your loss." She turned away without responding and disappeared back into the cabin. That night, stretched out on a bed of hay in the barn, Nathan stared up at the rafters. The Nielsen ranch was clearly struggling, that much was evident from his brief inspection. But there was something about Nora's fierce independence, her refusal to abandon her home despite overwhelming tragedy, that resonated with him. Perhaps here, in this place of death, he might find something worth living for. Morning arrived with a pale, milky light that crept through the cracks in the barn walls. Nathan rose before dawn, years of habit impossible to break. He set about the most obvious repairs, fixing the barn door hinge with materials he found scattered about. By the time Nora emerged from the cabin, he had already repaired 2 sections of the neglected fence. She stood on the porch watching him work, her expression unreadable in the early light. "I didn't ask you to do that," she finally said, approaching with 2 steaming mugs. "No, madam, you didn't." Nathan accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. But it needed doing. I told you I can't pay much. This coffee's a good start. He took a sip, the bitter warmth a welcome comfort, and I've gone longer on less. Something flickered across her face, perhaps the ghost of a smile, quickly suppressed. There's breakfast inside if you're hungry. Over a simple meal of cornbread and beans, Nathan learned more about Nora Nielsen and her ranch. Her husband, Thomas, had brought her to Gunnison 3 years earlier, full of dreams about building a cattle empire. They'd struggled against harsh winters, summer droughts, and hostile neighbors who resented newcomers staking claims. Just as things had begun to improve, the typhoid swept through, leaving Nora alone with 40 head of cattle, dwindling supplies, and a mountain of debt. Why stay? Nathan asked, watching her carefully. Most would have sold what they could and headed east. This land is all I have left, Nora replied, her gaze drifting to the window that framed the distant mountains. And I made a promise. Nathan didn't press for details. He understood the weight of promises all too well. I'll need help with the cattle, she continued after a moment. Moving them to the south pasture before winter sets in. Think you can manage that? Yes, madam. Stop calling me madam. Makes me feel like my mother-in-law. There it was again, that faint hint of a smile that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Nora will do. Yes, Nora. He rose, clearing his plate. I'll start on the east fence before we move the herd. It won't hold as is. And so began their tentative partnership. Days turned into weeks as Nathan repaired fences, reinforced the barn, and helped move the cattle to winter grazing. Nora worked alongside him, her strength and determination impressive. She knew the land intimately, understood cattle better than most men Nathan had known, and never once complained about the backbreaking labor. But at night, when they retreated to their separate quarters, Nora to the cabin and Nathan to his improved space in the barn loft, he sometimes heard her crying. Soft, muffled sobs that carried through the still night air. Each time he would grip the edge of his makeshift bed, fighting the urge to go to her. She hadn't asked for his comfort, only his labor, and he respected her boundaries fiercely. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the land in white before October had fully passed. Nathan awoke to find the world transformed, the familiar landscape rendered strange and new under its pristine cover. He built a fire in the barn stove and waited for Nora to emerge from the cabin. When she didn't appear by mid-morning, concern drove him across the yard. His knock went unanswered, so he pushed the door open cautiously. Nora, he found her huddled by the cold fireplace, shivering violently, her face flushed with fever. Go away, she managed, her voice barely audible. Don't want you getting sick too. But Nathan was already kneeling beside her, pressing his palm to her forehead. You're burning up. Just like Thomas, she murmured, her eyes unfocused. It started like this. Fear gripped Nathan's heart, not typhoid again, not when she had already lost so much, not when he had just found her. The realization that he cared what happened to Nora Nielsen hit him with unexpected force. This woman, with her fierce independence and fragile strength, had somehow breached the walls he'd built around himself since the war. You're not going to die, he said firmly, gathering her into his arms despite her weak protests. I won't let you. He carried her to the bed, wrapped her in every blanket he could find, and set about building a roaring fire in the fireplace. When that was done, he melted snow for water and searched the cabin for any medicines she might have. For 3 days, Nathan barely left Nora's side. He spooned broth between her cracked lips, bathed her face with cool cloths when the fever raged, and held her hand when delirious nightmares made her cry out for her lost husband. He talked to her constantly, telling her stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the war, and the years of wandering that followed. Whether she heard him or not, he couldn't say, but the sound of his voice seemed to calm her when nothing else would. On the 4th morning, he awoke from a fitful doze in the chair beside her bed to find Nora watching him, her eyes clear for the first time in days. You stayed, she whispered. Told you I don't make promises I can't keep. His voice was rough with exhaustion. What promise? That you're not alone. He reached for the water cup, helping her drink. How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by the entire herd. She managed a weak smile, but alive. Doctor from town said it's not typhoid, just a bad influenza. Nathan had ridden through the snowstorm to fetch the physician on the second day. Said you'll recover with rest. Nora's gaze drifted to the window where snow still fell in gentle swirls. The cattle are fine. I've been checking them twice daily. She looked back at him, a question in her eyes. Why are you doing this, Nathan? You could have left, found work somewhere warm for the winter. He considered his answer carefully. Maybe I'm tired of leaving. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, perhaps, or the seed of something that might one day grow into more. But Nora was still weak, still grieving, and Nathan was patient enough to wait. As winter settled fully over Gunnison, Nora regained her strength gradually. Nathan moved from the barn into the cabin's small second room, the practicality of the arrangement overriding any concerns about propriety. They fell into a comfortable routine, Nathan handling the outdoor work in the bitter cold, Nora managing the household and gradually resuming lighter chores. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes sharing comfortable silence. Nathan taught Nora how to play checkers using a board he carved from a piece of pine and pieces made from buttons and coins. She proved to be a formidable opponent, her tactical mind catching him off guard more than once. Where did you learn to think like that? He asked one night after she had thoroughly trounced him for the third time. My father was a ship's captain, she replied, resetting the board. He taught me chess when I was 8, said it would help me navigate life's treacherous waters. Her smile turned wistful. He died at sea when I was 15. And your mother remarried quickly. Her new husband had no use for a headstrong stepdaughter. Nora's fingers lingered on a checker piece. I became a governess until I met Thomas. He promised me adventure and my own land. She laughed softly. I got both, though not quite as I imagined. Do you regret it? Nathan asked, watching her closely. Coming west. Nora considered the question, her gaze drifting to the window where moonlight reflected off the snow-covered landscape. No, she said finally. Despite everything, no, there's a freedom here I never found in Boston drawing rooms. Nathan nodded, understanding perfectly. The open space gets in your blood. Yes, she looked at him with newfound curiosity. What about you? Any family waiting for news of Nathan Ziegler? None living, he replied. Parents gone before the war, no siblings, had a girl once, thought we'd marry when I returned. He shrugged, the old pain dulled by time. She chose differently. Her loss, Nora said simply, and the genuine warmth in her voice eased something tight in Nathan's chest. The worst blizzard of the season struck in early January, howling winds driving snow against the cabin walls with such force it seemed they might buckle. Nathan and Nora huddled by the fire, listening to the storm's fury. I should check on the cattle, Nathan said, rising from his chair. Nora caught his arm. You'll freeze to death out there. The herd has shelter in the south pasture. If the fence breaks, they'll scatter. We'll lose half of them before we can round them up again. He moved toward his coat hanging by the door. Then I'm coming with you? Absolutely not. This is my ranch, Nathan, she reminded him, already pulling on her boots. My cattle, my responsibility. He recognized the stubborn set of her jaw and knew argument was futile. Stay close to me out there. If we get separated in this, neither of us will make it back. They tied themselves together with a length of rope before venturing into the storm. The biting cold stole breath from lungs, and the driving snow made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. They leaned into the wind, fighting for every step toward the south pasture. The cattle were huddled together for warmth, but as Nathan had feared, a section of fence had indeed given way. Already, several animals had wandered into the open prairie beyond. We need to close that gap. Nora shouted above the wind, pointing to where fence posts had been driven down by snow weight. Working together, they managed to drag fallen timber to create a makeshift barrier. The physical exertion kept their blood flowing, but Nathan could see Nora's lips turning blue, her movements growing sluggish as the cold seeped through their layers of clothing. "We need to head back," he called out as they secured the last post. "Right now." She nodded, too cold to argue, and they turned toward where they thought the cabin should be. But in the whiteout conditions, all direction was lost. The rope between them was their only certainty, the only proof that they weren't alone in the howling void. Nathan pulled Nora close, shielding her from the worst of the wind with his body. "We need to keep moving," he shouted into her ear. "Follow the slope uphill." They stumbled forward, each step an act of pure will. Nathan's lungs burned with cold, and Nora's weight against him grew heavier as her strength waned. Just when he feared they would both collapse into the snow, never to rise again, his outstretched hand struck wood, the barn. They had missed the cabin entirely, but the barn would provide shelter until the storm passed. With the last of his strength, Nathan dragged the door open and pulled Nora inside. The sudden absence of wind was disorienting, the relative quiet broken only by their harsh breathing and the distant howl of the storm. "We need to get warm," Nathan said, guiding Nora to a pile of hay. His fingers were too numb to work the buttons of her coat, and hers trembled too badly to help. "Nora, listen to me. We're both showing signs of freezing. We need to share body heat." Through the haze of cold, she nodded her understanding. Together, they managed to remove their snow-crusted outer layers and burrow into the hay, pulling a horse blanket over them. Nathan wrapped his arms around Nora, feeling her violent shivering gradually subside as their shared warmth began to penetrate the bone-deep chill. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for not letting me die out there." "I told you," he murmured into her hair, "you're not alone anymore." She tilted her face up to look at him, their faces inches apart in the dimness of the barn. For a long moment they simply gazed at each other, breath mingling in the cold air. Then, with a deliberateness that belied her exhaustion, Nora pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Nathan responded, his hand coming up to cradle her face, it deepened into something hungry and alive. All the unspoken feelings that had built between them over the winter months poured into that kiss, gratitude and longing, shared grief and newfound hope. When they finally broke apart, Nora's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I didn't think I would ever feel this again," she confessed. "After Thomas, I thought that part of me had died too." Nathan brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We've both been half living for too long," she nodded, settling back against his chest. "The storm is still raging," she observed, listening to the wind's howl. "We have shelter," he replied, pulling the blanket more securely around them. "And each other. We'll wait it out." As they drifted into exhausted sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Nathan realized that for the first time in years, he was exactly where he wanted to be. Morning brought brilliant sunshine and a world transformed. The blizzard had left behind pristine drifts higher than a man's head in places, sculpted into fantastic shapes by the wind. It took Nathan and Nora most of the day to dig a path from the barn to the cabin, working together with renewed energy and purpose. That night, Nora invited Nathan to share her bed rather than return to his small room. They came together with a tenderness that gradually gave way to passion, their bodies learning each other in the firelight. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the quilt, Nora traced the scar that ran across Nathan's shoulder. "From the war?" she asked. "Gettysburg," he confirmed. "I was lucky." The ball went clean through. Her fingers continued their gentle exploration, finding other marks that told the story of his life. "And this one? Bar fight in Dodge City. Man took exception to me winning at cards. Were you cheating?" she asked with a smile in her voice. "Didn't need to." He was terrible at hiding his tells. Nathan captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Your turn." "For what?" "To tell me your stories." He traced a thin white line on her forearm. "This one, for instance, fell from a horse when I was 12. My father was furious not about the injury, but because I'd been riding astride in trousers I'd stolen from the stable boy. Nathan laughed. Somehow that doesn't surprise me. As winter gradually loosened its grip on the land, Nathan and Nora's bond deepened. They worked side by side to prepare the ranch for spring, mending fences damaged by snow, caring for the new calves, and planting a vegetable garden that would sustain them through the coming year. But as the ground thawed, Nathan couldn't help but notice how Nora's gaze would sometimes drift to the 5 graves behind the house, her expression growing distant and sad. "We should give them proper markers," he said one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch. "Something more lasting than those wooden crosses." Nora leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You would do that, of course." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We could ride into town tomorrow, see about getting some stonework done." "We," she repeated softly. "It's still strange sometimes, not being alone." "Good strange or bad strange?" "Good," she assured him, turning in his arms to face him. "Definitely good." In town the next day, as they arranged for headstones to be carved, Nathan noticed Nora drawing curious glances from the shopkeepers and townsfolk. It occurred to him suddenly how their living arrangement might appear to others. "Does it bother you?" he asked as they rode back toward the ranch, the spring sun warm on their backs. "What people might think about us," Nora laughed, the sound bright in the clear air. "Nathan Ziegler, are you worried about my reputation? Just don't want to cause you trouble." "I buried my husband and his entire family 4 months ago," she said matter-of-factly. "I run a cattle ranch on my own. Gossip is the least of my concerns." Nathan nodded, relieved by her practical attitude. Still, as they rode, a thought began to form in his mind, one that had been quietly growing for some time. That evening, after supper, he took Nora's hand and led her out to the porch. The first stars were just appearing in the deepening blue of the sky, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of new grass and distant wildflowers. "I've been thinking," he began, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since youth. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, but her eyes were soft as she looked up at him. "I came to Gunnison with nothing but a tired horse and worn-out dreams," he said, keeping hold of her hand. "Found fresh graves behind your house and a woman too stubborn to give up." Her smile encouraged him to continue. "You said they were all gone, and I told you that you weren't alone. I meant it then, and I mean it even more now." Understanding dawned in Nora's eyes as Nathan reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band purchased secretly in town that day. "I'm not Thomas," he said carefully. "I know I can't replace what you lost, don't want to try, but I love you, Nora Nielsen. Would be honored if you'd consider becoming Nora Ziegler." For a long moment she was silent and fear gripped Nathan's heart. Had he misread everything? Was it too soon? Then he saw the tears spilling down her cheeks and the brilliant smile that accompanied them. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I would be proud to be your wife." Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, then lifted her off her feet in an embrace that spoke more eloquently than words of his joy and relief. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Gunnison, with the doctor who had treated Nora's influenza and the blacksmith who had helped create the iron headstones as their witnesses. Nora wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Nathan had purchased a new shirt for the occasion and polished his boots until they gleamed. The ceremony was brief, the words traditional, but the promises exchanged were profound. As they rode back to the ranch as husband and wife, Nathan felt a sense of rightness of coming home that had eluded him for most of his life. That spring and summer were the happiest either had known. The cattle thrived, the garden flourished, and they added 2 horses and a milk cow to their growing ranch. They worked hard during daylight hours and spent the nights wrapped in each other's arms, talking of dreams and plans for the future. In late September, as they were preparing to move the cattle to winter pasture, Nora approached Nathan with news that would change everything once again. "I'm expecting a child," she told him, her hands resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Our baby will arrive in early spring." Nathan stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. Then he swept Nora into his arms, spinning her around as joy bubbled up inside him like a wellspring. "A baby," he repeated in wonder. "Our baby." The winter of 1880 was milder than the previous year, allowing Nathan to make significant improvements to the cabin in preparation for their growing family. He added a proper bedroom for the baby, reinforced the roof, and installed larger windows to let in more light. Nora, despite her advancing pregnancy, remained active in ranch affairs, though she grudgingly allowed Nathan to take on the more strenuous tasks. Together they developed plans to expand their herd and perhaps hire help once the spring roundup was complete. As Nora's time grew near, Nathan rode into town to ensure the doctor would be available when needed. He returned with not only the physician's promise, but also a hand-carved cradle purchased from a furniture maker who had recently set up shop in Gunnison. "It's beautiful," Nora exclaimed, running her hands over the smooth wood. "Our child will sleep well here." "Our son," Nathan said with a grin. "You seem very certain. Just a feeling." He placed his hand on the swell of her belly, marveling as he felt movement beneath his palm. "Strong like his mother, or daughter," Nora countered with a smile. "Either way, this child will have something I never had growing up." "What's that?" "A home that doesn't move with the tides, roots in solid ground." Her expression grew thoughtful, "and two parents who love each other." Nathan drew her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "This child will have everything we can give." Their son, James Thomas Ziegler, was born on a clear April morning in 1881, arriving with a lusty cry that proclaimed his healthy lungs to the world. Nora, exhausted but radiant, cradled the infant to her breast as Nathan looked on in wonder. "He's perfect," Nathan whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "Absolutely perfect." "He has your eyes," Nora observed as the baby gazed up at them with unfocused blue eyes. "And your determination," Nathan replied as the infant's tiny fist gripped his finger with surprising strength. "Already holding on tight to what he wants." The first year of James's life brought new challenges and joys to the Ziegler ranch. Nora proved to be a natural mother, balancing the demands of the infant with her responsibilities to the ranch. Nathan found himself constantly amazed by her strength and adaptability. For his part, Nathan embraced fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to all aspects of his life. He would often carry James with him as he worked around the ranch, talking to the baby about cattle and horses, the changing seasons, and his hopes for the future. With the profits from a successful cattle sale, they were able to hire two reliable ranch hands, brothers from Montana who were skilled with livestock and respectful of a female ranch owner, a rarity in those days. The extra help allowed Nora more time with James and gave Nathan the opportunity to expand their operations, adding sheep to their livestock and improving irrigation for their growing fields. As James's first birthday approached, Nathan rode into town to purchase a special gift for his son. While there, he encountered the postmaster, who handed him a letter addressed to Nora. The return address showed a Boston law firm Nathan didn't recognize. That evening, after James had been tucked into his cradle, Nathan handed the letter to Nora. "Came for you today," he said, watching her expression carefully as she recognized the Boston address. She opened it slowly, her brow furrowing as she read. "It's from my mother's attorney," she said, scanning the pages. "She died 3 months ago." "I'm sorry," Nathan said, though he knew Nora had long ago made peace with her estrangement from her mother. "There's more." Nora looked up, shock evident in her features. "She left me her entire estate, the house in Boston, her investments, everything." She handed Nathan the letter. "It's a substantial sum." Nathan whistled softly as he read the figures. "This would buy the finest ranch in Colorado, several of them, in fact." "Is that what you want?" Nora asked quietly. "To leave here?" Nathan looked around the cabin that had become their home at the checkerboard still set up by the fireplace. the family Bible on the shelf, the cradle where their sons slept peacefully. Through the window, he could see the 5 headstones gleaming in the moonlight, a reminder of all that had brought them to this point. "No," he said firmly, handing the letter back. "This is our home. This land has seen our worst sorrows and our greatest joys. Our son's first steps will be on this soil." He took her hands in his. "But the decision is yours as well. If you wanted to return east, never," Nora interrupted. "My life is here, our life." She glanced toward James's cradle, but the money could secure his future. "Perhaps establish a trust for his education. And improve the ranch," Nathan added, beginning to see possibilities. "We could build a proper house, expand the herd, maybe even buy that adjacent property Henderson has been looking to sell." Nora smiled, wrapping her arms around his waist. "So we stay," he confirmed, kissing her softly, "and we build something lasting." The inheritance allowed the Zieglers to transform their modest ranch into one of the most prosperous in the county. They built a spacious new house, though Nora insisted on keeping the original cabin standing as a reminder of their beginnings. They expanded their herds, purchased additional land, and became known for the quality of their livestock and their fair treatment of workers. 2 years after James's birth, Nora gave birth to twin daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, completing their family. As the children grew, they filled the ranch with laughter and energy, learning the ways of the land from parents who cherished both the beauty and the challenges of their Western life. On a warm summer evening in 1889, as they sat on the wide porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Nora leaned against Nathan's shoulder with a contented sigh. "You ever think about that day you rode in?" she asked. "What might have happened if you'd chosen a different path?" Nathan watched 8-year-old James teaching his 5-year-old sisters how to lasso a fence post, his patient instructions punctuated by peals of girlish laughter. "Not a day goes by that I don't thank whatever fate or providence guided me here." Nora followed his gaze to their children, her eyes soft with love. "When you found those fresh graves, you could have ridden on. Most men would have." "I wasn't looking for graves," Nathan said quietly. "I was looking for a place to belong, just didn't know it until I found you." She turned to face him, the setting sun gilding her features with golden light. The years had added a few strands of silver to her dark hair and fine lines around her eyes, but to Nathan, she had never been more beautiful. "When I said they were all gone, I truly believed I had nothing left," she told him. "You gave me the courage to start again." "You had that courage all along," he countered, taking her hand. "You just needed someone to remind you that you weren't alone." "And I never will be again," she said with certainty. Her fingers intertwining with his, beyond them, the 5 headstones stood in solemn witness to the past, while before them, their children embodied all the promise of the future. The land stretched out around them, the mountains standing guard on the horizon constant, enduring, much like the love they had built from the ashes of loss. As twilight deepened into dusk, Nathan and Nora Ziegler remained on their porch, watching stars appear one by one above their home. The journey that had brought them together had begun with grief and solitude, but had blossomed into a life richer and fuller than either could have imagined on that fateful autumn day. In the wild expanse of the Colorado frontier, they had found not just survival, but a profound sense of belonging to the land, to each other, and to the family they had created. What had started with fresh graves and a promise not to leave had grown into a legacy that would endure long after them, carried forward by children who would remember their story and pass it down through generations to come. And as night settled fully over the Ziegler ranch, Nathan drew Nora close, grateful for the twist of fate that had led a weary, broken man to the doorstep of a grieving, determined woman. Together, they had discovered the most profound truth of the frontier, that even in the face of devastating loss, the human heart retains an extraordinary capacity for renewal, and that love, once found, can transform the most barren landscape into a place of boundless possibility.